So Andrew, you've obviously laid out different ways in which you can apply creative thinking, and as you say, don't focus just on the hardware, but on the software, which requires perhaps rewiring or relooking at your own narratives and so on. Now, what's been your experience, right? You work with companies around the world. What's been your experience? In other words, one thing is to say I put them through a workshop or even a very nice, powerful simulation, right? But what's been your experience of saying that, how is there, if I can call it, is there some average time or a duration perhaps to say that, where you get a group of guys who are, on one end of the spectrum to say that, 0 on a scale of 10, that again, not very, very creative or not applying their creativity to the point where they've started looking at things more laterally. Now, how much is that time frame in your experience? I'm sure it's gonna.
Oh, that's how much.
Yeah.
How long is a piece of string? When we wrote the book Who Killed Creativity and How to Get It Back, we wanted to take, as I said, all the information that we'd gathered from workshops, all the excuses, all the reasons why people said this is not for me, but my boss sent me. I often used to say, why are you here? And I said, you can't use the excuse my boss sent me. And they'd all laugh and go, yeah, but it's true. So as I said, there was no point just teaching creative thinking and design thinking unless we dealt with the real issues, hence the Who Killed Creativity and How Do We Get It Back. But when we wrote the book, we co-authored it with a neuroscientist and a psychologist. So for example, one of the killers is fear. So you can't be creative if you're working in the back part of your brain, which is the primitive part of the brain. If you're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, that's about getting out of an emergency. Now, that fight, flight, or freeze mode, from a neuroscience perspective, is really important. It's kept us alive for many years if something goes wrong. But when you're in that fight, flight, or freeze, there's no room in your brain, there's no bandwidth in your brain to be creative and come up with great ideas. The problem in companies, the old companies, because I'm going to just distinguish between the companies that are all about productivity and high KPIs and reaching these stretch targets, they create an environment where people live in a constant state of fear, a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze. And you can't spend 5 days of the week putting them in fight, flight, or freeze, the dorsal dive, in fear, and then say on Friday night, you can stay up all night, we're going to do a hackathon or a create-a-thon and give you Coca-Cola and pizza, and by Saturday morning, we expect you to come up with these great ideas. It doesn't work like that. There's got to be some integrity in the process. And so we've got to create environments for people where they can be creative, where they can use the front part of their brain. And that fear is just one of the killers. We've got 7 of them. I can go through them if you like at a later stage, but I'm just taking the example of fear. As long as people are coming to work in fear of goals, fear of risk, fear of the unknown, fear of not reaching their KPIs, psychologically and from a neuroscience perspective, we can't ask them to be creative. It doesn't work. The brain is being overrun by the use of fear. So we must address the culture of fear in the workplace if we want people to be creative. Now, that doesn't mean fear doesn't have its place. I mean, if we're just going to tell people to hang around and brainstorm for 5 weeks, that could be very expensive as well. So there is definitely a balance between the two, but that's just one example of where we've got to be careful in terms of helping people understand what's going to block their creativity. And once we get rid of fear and kick it out, or get rid of the suspect or identify it as a killer and know where it happens around the office, where we hear those, where we get into a paralyzing state of fear, once we can deal with that, then we can go on and be creative. And then the creativity flows naturally. Now, we also learned in our research that 98% of children score high in divergent thinking and creative thinking. Do you know what percent of adults score high? 2%. So we were actually all born with the ability to make those connections, to come up with great ideas. But school, university, and the killers have just sort of, a bit like eating a lot of bad food. We just keep layering up those killers and letting them wander around our brain, letting them wander around the office unchecked. And that's why we think it's really important to deal with the diagnostic side of it and get that CQ high again, get the killers out of our life so we can go on and start rescuing creativity.